They say that civilization is the triumph of the hammer over the vine. Alpha King Draken Obsidian believed this truth with the fervor of a zealot. He looked at a forest and saw only timber waiting to be cut. He looked at a mountain and saw only stone waiting to be quarried. He looked at the earth itself not as a mother, but as a beast to be broken, paved, and silenced under a layer of cold, perfect concrete. He built the Iron-Spire citadel to be a monument to this philosophy. It was a fortress of black steel and gray stone that scraped the sky, a place where no grass grew and no bird sang. He thought he had conquered the wild. He thought he had poured enough cement to choke the breath out of the world. But the king forgot one simple rule of nature. You can pave over the dirt, you can burn the trees, and you can poison the water. But you cannot kill the roots. They simply wait in the dark, drinking the bitterness, growing strong on the rage of the land. And in the deepest, darkest trench beneath his fortress, a girl covered in muck is about to teach the king a lesson in geology. The earth does not forgive. It remembers. And when it finally decides to speak, it will not whisper. It will scream. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to Nova Blood Moon, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now let's continue. Chapter 1. The Iron-Spire citadel did not sleep. It vibrated day and night. The massive steam-powered pile drivers hammered into the bedrock, driving steel shafts deeper into the crust of the mountain. The air tasted of sulfur, coal dust, and unwashed wolf fur. It was the scent of progress. It was the scent of the Obsidian Pack, the most powerful industrial war machine on the continent. King Draken Obsidian walked the perimeter of the northern wall, his boots clicking sharply against the polished black basalt. He was a man composed of sharp angles. His jaw was a blade, his cheekbones were granite, and his eyes were the cold, flat gray of a winter sky. He wore a long coat of stiff military leather, pristine white gloves, and a crown made not of gold, but of woven steel cables. "The foundation is settling, sire," Silas the architect said, struggling to keep pace with the Alpha's long strides. Silas was a nervous man, perpetually covered in chalk dust, holding a roll of blueprints that trembled in his grip. "We are digging too deep," the miners reported. "Sounds, groaning, deep in the mantle." "Stone does not groan, Silas," Draken said, his voice a smooth baritone that lacked any warmth. "Stone yields. If the mountain complains, add more weight. Silence it." "But, sire," Silas whispered, looking around nervously at the smog-choked sky, "the legends say this peak was once a sacred grove. The earth spirits are dead." Draken cut him off. He stopped at the edge of the parapet, looking down. Below them, 1,000 feet down, lay the trench. It was the digestive tract of the castle, a massive open-air sewer canal where the waste of the city, the runoff from the factories, and the sludge from the mines all flowed together into a toxic river of filth. "There are no spirits," Draken declared, gripping the railing. "There is only resources and will, and I have enough will to pave the entire world if I choose." He took a deep breath, expecting the familiar comforting sting of ozone and smoke. Instead, he smelled something else. It was faint, barely a whisper on the wind, rising from the abyss below. Wildflowers, wet soil, and honey. Draken stiffened. His wolf, a beast of iron and logic, suddenly snarled in his chest. It wasn't a snarl of aggression. It was a snarl of want. The scent hit him again, stronger this time. It cut through the smog like a diamond cut in glass. It was the scent of life, the scent of a mate. Draken gripped the railing so hard the steel groaned. "Impossible," he whispered. "Sire?" Silas asked. "Open the maintenance gate," Draken commanded, his eyes fixed on the darkness of the trench. "We are going down." Renna did not know what the sky looked like. She remembered it being blue from a dream she had 10 years ago, but memory was a tricky thing. In the dark, she stood knee-deep in the sludge of the trench, a heavy iron shovel in her hands. She was small, her body thin and wiry from years of hard labor. Her skin, once a warm olive tone, was now permanently stained with gray muck. Her hair was a matted mess of brown tangles, chopped short with a knife to keep the lice away. She was a mud-blood, a slave without a wolf spirit, a mute who hadn't spoken a word since the day the Obsidian soldiers burned her village and dragged her here to clear the drains. "Keep moving." "Filth!" a guard shouted from the catwalk above, throwing a half-eaten apple core down at her. It hit her shoulder with a wet thud. Renna didn't flinch. She didn't look up. She just kept shoveling the heavy, toxic sludge, keeping the flow moving so the castle above didn't choke on its own waste. But while her face was blank, her hands were doing something secret. As she pressed her palm against the slimy stone wall of the trench to steady herself, she closed her eyes. "Hello," she thought, projecting the feeling downward, through the stone, through the bedrock, into the magma beneath. The wall vibrated under her hand. It wasn't a mechanical vibration. It was a purr. A patch of moss near her fingers glowed with a sudden, vibrant bioluminescence. A small white flower, defying all laws of biology, sprouted from the solid rock in seconds, blooming in the darkness. Renna smiled, a tiny, almost invisible crack in her mask of indifference. The earth was still there. It was hurt. It was heavy. But it was listening. "They are heavy, Mother," Renna thought to the stone, "but we are patient." Suddenly, the heavy iron grate above her section of the trench screeched open. Light, harsh, artificial electric light, flooded down, blinding her. Renna gasped, covering her eyes. The other slaves scrambled back into the shadows, terrified. Visits from the High Ones usually meant execution. A metal cage descended on a winch. 2 figures stood inside. One was Silas, the architect. The other was a man Renna had only seen on the gold coins she sometimes found in the muck. The king. Draken Obsidian stepped out of the cage before it even hit the sludge. His pristine boots sank into the filth. He didn't seem to notice. His gray eyes were wide, manic, scanning the group of cowering slaves. His nostrils flared. "Where is she?" Draken roared. His voice echoed off the wet walls, terrifying in its intensity. Renna tried to back away. She tried to blend into the stone wall, asking the moss to cover her. But the king's head snapped toward her. He saw her. He didn't see a girl. He saw a creature of mud. She was covered in it from head to toe. She smelled of sewage and rot. But to Draken, she smelled like spring. He walked toward her. He moved like a machine, unstoppable. He stopped 2 feet away. Renna couldn't look him in the eye. Mudbloods were killed for making eye contact. She stared at his white gloves. They were so clean. They looked like clouds. Draken reached out. His hand trembled. He grabbed her chin. his glove instantly staining gray, and forced her head up. Renna looked at him. Her eyes were not gray or brown. They were green, a deep, startling emerald green that seemed to swirl with living light. Draken stared into those eyes. He felt the bond slam into place. It was a physical weight, a golden chain locking his soul to hers. Mate, his wolf howled. Queen, mine, dirt. His mind screamed, filth, weakness. Draken recoiled as if he had been burned. He dropped her chin. He looked at his glove, now smeared with the sewage that coated her skin. He looked at Renna. She was everything he hated. She was nature. She was chaos. She was the mud he had spent his life trying to pave over. "This is a joke," Draken whispered, his voice shaking with rage. "The moon goddess mocks me. She ties the king of iron to a swamp rat." Renna didn't speak. She couldn't. She just watched him, her green eyes wide and unblinking. She felt the earth beneath his boots ripple. The ground wanted to swallow him to protect her. "No," she told the earth. "Not yet." "Sire," Silas squeaked from the cage. Is she the one?" Draken wiped his gloved hand on his coat, leaving a streak of filth on the expensive leather. His face hardened into a mask of cruel resolve. "She is the one," Draken spat. "She is the weed in my garden." He grabbed Renna's arm. He didn't be gentle. He gripped her with bruising force, hauling her toward the cage. "Come, creature," Draken growled. "You are leaving the pit." Renna stumbled, her bare feet slipping in the sludge. She tried to pull back, terrified. "Do not fight me," Draken roared, shaking her. "You are coming up to the light. And tomorrow I will show the world exactly what I do with weeds." He threw her into the cage. He hit the ascent button. As the cage rose, leaving the dark comfort of the earth behind, Renna looked through the bars at the king. He stood as far away from her as possible, staring at the wall, refusing to look at the mate he had just found. He thought he was rescuing her to punish her. He didn't know that by pulling her out of the ground, he was uncorking a volcano. He dragged her out of the trench and into the blinding smog of the Iron-Spire. And the moment her feet left the earth, the mountain beneath the castle gave a low, ominous rumble that shook the dust from the king's crown. Chapter 2. The holding cell was not designed to hold a prisoner. It was designed to kill a spirit. Located at the very pinnacle of the Iron-Spire, the room was a cube of cold, polished steel. There were no windows, only a narrow ventilation slit that whistled with the high-altitude winds. The floor was not stone or earth. It was a grate of iron mesh, suspended over a dark drop shaft that went down for 50 floors. Renna sat in the corner, huddled into a tight ball. She was shivering. Down in the trench it had been filthy, toxic, and wet, but it had been warm. The decomposition of the city's waste created heat, and beneath the sludge, the bedrock hummed with the slow geological heartbeat of the mountain. Renna had always felt held by the earth, even when she was enslaved by the men walking on top of it. Here, in the sky, she felt untethered. The steel floor sucked the heat from her bare feet. The air smelled of ozone and sterilized metal. There was no moss to touch, no stone to whisper to. She was cut off from the mother. She closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind, trying to find the pulse of the ground. "Where are you?" She screamed in the silence of her head. Faintly, vibrating up through the millions of tons of steel and concrete that made up the fortress, she felt an answer. It wasn't a comfort. It was a growl. The mountain was angry. It knew its daughter had been taken. "Soon," the vibration seemed to say. "Soon." Renna looked at her hands. They were still stained gray from the trench, the muck dried into the cracks of her skin. She rubbed her thumb over her palm. She didn't want to be clean. The dirt was her armor. The dirt was real. Everything in this tower, the lights, the air, the king, was a lie. The heavy maglock of the cell door hissed. The bolts retracted with a sound like a gunshot. Renna flinched, pressing her back against the cold metal wall. The door swung open. It wasn't the king. A woman stepped inside. She brought with her a scent that made Renna gag instantly, a cloying chemical mixture of synthetic rose and formaldehyde. It was Lady Vesper, the king's intended, the plastic queen. Vesper was beautiful in the way a diamond drill bit was beautiful, hard, sharp, and expensive. She had pale skin that looked like porcelain and hair the color of spun platinum, styled in intricate rigid waves that didn't move when she turned her head. She wore a coat made of silver fur, but Renna's nose twitched. It wasn't real fur. It was a synthetic weave, created in the factories, smelling of plastic and oil. Vesper stood in the doorway, staring at Renna with eyes that were a chilling artificial blue. "So," Vesper said, her voice like glass breaking, "this is the creature that made the king stain his gloves." She stepped into the cell. Her heels clicked sharply on the metal grate. She held a handkerchief over her nose. "You smell," Vesper observed, walking a circle around Renna, "like a grave." Renna didn't look up. She kept her gaze on Vesper's shoes. They were pristine white, with heels made of clear glass. "Look at me when I speak to you, mudblood," Vesper snapped. She reached out with a manicured hand and grabbed a handful of Renna's matted hair, yanking her head back. Renna gasped, her neck straining. She was forced to look into Vesper's face. She saw the hatred there. It wasn't just disgust. It was fear. Vesper knew about the bond. She knew that biology had chosen this filth over her. And for a woman who had engineered her entire life to become queen, that was an insult she couldn't tolerate. "Draken told me," Vesper whispered, leaning down. "He told me the fates played a trick. He told me he felt the pull." She smiled, revealing teeth that had been filed to perfect points. "But Draken is a man of the new world. He doesn't care about old magic. He doesn't care about fated mates. He cares about power. And you," Vesper laughed, shaking Renna's head, "you are the opposite of power. You are a biological dead end." Vesper let go of Renna's hair, wiping her hand on her coat. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small glass bottle. The liquid inside was bright pink. "He is going to reject you tomorrow," Vesper said casually, uncorking the bottle. "Publicly, in the courtyard. He wants to show the pack that he is stronger than his instincts. He is going to sever the bond and pour you back into the sewer." She tilted the bottle. "But we can't have you smelling like nature when you stand next to him. It offends the aesthetic." Vesper upended the bottle. Cold, viscous perfume poured over Renna's head. It ran down her face, stinging her eyes, soaking into her rags. It smelled overwhelming, a chemical assault of fake flowers and alcohol. Renna sputtered, coughing as the liquid hit her lips. It tasted bitter. "There," Vesper sneered, tossing the empty bottle onto the floor. "Now you smell like civilization." She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Enjoy your last night above ground, rat. Tomorrow you go back to the mud, and I will be queen." The door slammed shut. Renna sat in the puddle of chemical perfume, her eyes burning. She wiped the slime from her face. She didn't cry. Tears were water, and water was precious. Instead, she placed her hand flat on the metal grate floor. The chemical smell was choking her, but beneath it, she felt the vibration again. It was stronger now. Thump, thump. The castle wasn't just humming, it was shaking. 5 floors down, in the grand hall of the Iron-Spire, Silas the architect was sweating. He stood before the massive eastern wall, a flashlight trembling in his hand. The wall was made of master stone, a reinforced concrete composite that was supposed to be indestructible. It was the spine of the fortress, designed to withstand siege engines, earthquakes, and time itself. But there was a crack. It wasn't a normal stress fracture. Stress fractures were jagged, lightning bolt shapes that followed the path of least resistance. This crack was curved, it spiraled, it branched, it looked like a vein. "It's spreading, sire," Silas whispered, tracing the line with his chalky finger. King Draken stood behind him, smoking a thin black cigar. He looked bored. "It is a settling crack, Silas," Draken dismissed, blowing a ring of gray smoke into the air. "We added 3 new factory floors last month. The weight distribution is adjusting. Fill it with epoxy and paint over it." "I tried," Silas said, his voice rising in panic. "I filled it an hour ago. The epoxy was pushed out." "Pushed out?" Draken frowned. "By what? Water pressure?" "No, sire," Silas said, shining his light into the fissure. "By sap." Draken stepped forward. He peered at the wall. Sure enough, oozing from the hairline fracture in the concrete was a thick, amber substance. It smelled rich and piney. Draken touched it. It was sticky. "Sap," Draken repeated, rubbing the substance between his gloved fingers. "In a concrete wall. Don't be an idiot, Silas. Concrete doesn't bleed sap." "The aggregate," Silas stammered. "We used stone from the Sacred Grove quarries to mix the concrete. Maybe the stone wasn't dead?" Draken's eyes went cold. He grabbed Silas by the lapels of his dusty coat and slammed him against the wall. "Stone is dead," Draken roared. "The forest is dead. I burned it myself. Do not speak to me of ghosts in the walls, architect. I pay you to build, not to tell ghost stories." "But the sound," Silas gasped. "Can't you hear it?" Draken paused. The citadel was usually filled with the noise of industry, the thrum of engines, the clanking of gears. But underneath that mechanical din, there was a new sound tonight, a low, grinding groan, like a massive wooden ship straining in a storm. Groan. The sound vibrated through the floor plates. It was deep, subsonic. It made the chandelier above them sway. "The mountain," Silas whispered. "It's groaning. It started the moment you brought the girl up from the trench." Draken released Silas, shoving him away. "The girl is a mute slave," Draken snapped. "She is dirt. She has no power. She doesn't even have a wolf." He turned his back on the bleeding wall. "It is a storm," Draken declared. "The barometer is dropping. The wind is hitting the spire. That is all." He walked toward the great doors. "Prepare the courtyard for tomorrow," Draken commanded. "I want everyone there, Vesper, the council, the press. I am going to end this superstition once and for all. When I throw her back in the mud, you will see. The world will not end. The walls will not fall." Draken walked out. Silas watched him go. Then he looked back at the crack in the wall. As he watched, the crack lengthened by another inch, and from the depths of the stone, a single tiny green tendril curled out, waving blindly in the air like a feeler. Silas swallowed hard. He backed away. The king was wrong. The stone wasn't dead. It was waking up. The night brought a storm that the weather stations hadn't predicted. Thunder didn't roll. It cracked like artillery fire directly over the Iron-Spire. Lightning lashed the tower, turning the sky a bruised purple. Rain fell in sheets, heavy torrential rain that hammered against the steel roof of Renna's cell like 1,000 drumsticks. Renna sat in the center of the cell. The chemical perfume had dried into a sticky crust on her skin, but she didn't care. She was listening to the rain. Usually the rain in the city was acidic, burning the skin. But this rain smelled different. It smelled clean. It smelled like the ocean. It smelled like reinforcements. The floor of her cell was vibrating constantly now. The metal grate rattled in its frame. "Are you ready?" the earth seemed to ask. Renna opened her mouth. Her throat was dry, unused for a decade. She didn't speak words. She just let out a breath. Oh! It was a sound of release. Suddenly, the door to her cell slammed open. 3 royal guards entered. They wore full tactical armor made of black Kevlar and steel. They held shock batons that crackled with blue electricity. "Get up!" the lead guard barked. Renna stood. She didn't cower this time. The vibration in the floor was traveling up her legs, making her blood hum. "The king awaits," the guard sneered. "Time to go back to the garbage." He reached out to grab her arm. As his hand touched her skin, a static shock, stronger than static, almost like a bite, zapped him. "Ouch!" He jerked his hand back, shaking it. "Little witch, you're static charged." "It's the storm," the second guard grunted. "Come on, drag her." They grabbed her, careful to hold the fabric of her rags rather than her skin. They dragged her out of the cell, down the long corridor, and into the service elevator. The descent was fast. Renna felt her stomach drop. They were going down, closer to the ground, closer to the source. When the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, the noise was deafening. The storm outside was raging. They marched her through the great hall, past the terrified servants, and toward the massive double doors that led to the central courtyard. Silas the architect was standing by the doors, wringing his hands. He looked at Renna as she passed. For a second, their eyes met. Silas saw the green fire in her irises. He saw the way the floor tiles seemed to shudder as she walked over them. "Don't," Silas whispered, though he was speaking to no one. "Don't take her outside, not in this rain." But the guards didn't listen. They pushed the doors open. The wind hit them like a physical blow. Rain swept into the hall, soaking the carpets instantly. "Move!" the guard shouted, shoving Renna out into the storm. She stumbled onto the paved courtyard. The black stones were slick with water. The rain washed the chemical perfume from her face in seconds, replacing the stench of formaldehyde with the scent of ozone and wet stone. Renna took a deep breath. She looked up. King Draken stood on a raised platform in the center of the courtyard, protected by a canopy. He looked like a god of industry, dry and imperious. Lady Vesper stood beside him, clutching his arm, sneering at the wet, miserable figure of the girl in the mud. Hundreds of nobles watched from the balconies, safe and dry. Draken stepped forward to the microphone. His voice boomed over the thunder. "Behold!" Draken shouted, "the weakness of the old world." Renna stood in the rain, shivering, but beneath her feet, through the soles of her bare feet, she felt the cobblestones shifting. They weren't just stones anymore. They were the lid of a coffin, and the thing inside was banging to get out. Draken looked down at her. He smiled a cruel, victorious smile. "Welcome to your ceremony, mudblood," he said. Renna looked back at him. And for the first time in 10 years, she smiled back. It was a terrifying smile, because she knew something he didn't. He had brought her to the ground to break her, but he had just reconnected the circuit. The Alpha King prepared to give his speech, but beneath his feet, the roots of the world were already coiling, preparing to swallow his kingdom whole. Chapter 3. The storm over the Iron-Spire citadel was not a natural weather event. It was a atmospheric bruise, purple and black, swirling directly above the towers of industry. The rain didn't fall. It was driven into the earth like nails by a wind that screamed through the steel girders of the fortress. In the center of the grand courtyard, the elite of the Obsidian Pack gathered under the safety of reinforced glass canopies. They were dry. They held crystal flutes of champagne. Their furs, mostly synthetic, made in the king's factories, kept them warm. They watched the spectacle in the center of the square with the detached amusement of people watching a play. Renna stood alone in the storm. She was soaked to the bone in seconds. Her rags clung to her shivering frame. Her hair was plastered to her skull, water running in rivulets down her face, washing away the last of the gray trench muck and the sticky residue of Lady Vesper's chemical perfume. She stood on the sleek, black cobblestones that King Draken had paved over the ancient soil. To anyone watching, she looked pathetic. A small, trembling creature, barefoot and broken, surrounded by the towering might of steel and stone. But Renna wasn't shivering from the cold. She was shivering from the noise. To the nobles, the only sound was the thunder. But to Renna, the ground beneath her feet was screaming. It was a deafening tectonic roar. The concrete was brittle. The rebar was stressed. The earth below was pushing up against the weight of the city like a prisoner hammering on the lid of a coffin. "Let us in," the ground whispered, a vibration traveling up her bare soles. "Break the seal." Renna squeezed her eyes shut. Wait, she thought back. He has to ask for it. 20 feet above her, standing on a raised dais of polished marble, King Draken Obsidian looked down at his mate. He looked magnificent in the floodlights. His black leather coat was dry. His steel cable crown caught the light of the lightning flashes. Beside him, Lady Vesper preened, clutching his arm, whispering something in his ear that made her laugh, a sharp, cruel sound that was swallowed by the wind. Draken stepped to the edge of the dais. He gripped the iron railing. He looked out at his court, then down at Renna. "Citizens of the Iron-Spire!" Draken shouted, his voice amplified by the hidden speakers throughout the courtyard. "Look closely at what stands before you." He pointed a gloved finger at Renna. "For generations we were told to fear the wild. We were told to worship the dirt, to bow to the trees, to let the chaos of nature rule our lives. But look at it. Look at the nature that the fates have tried to shackle me to," the crowd murmured, leaning forward. "Weak!" Draken roared. "Filthy, silent. This is what the old world offers us, a mud rat that cannot speak, cannot shift, and cannot build. This is the chaos we paved over to build a perfect society." He looked at Renna with pure contempt. "They say she is my fated mate. They say biology demands I accept her." Draken ripped his glove off his hand, the hand that had touched her earlier, and threw it into the puddles below. "I reject biology," Draken declared. "I choose steel. I choose order. I choose the future." He turned to Vesper and pulled her close, kissing her fiercely in front of the cameras and the court. The crowd cheered, a mechanical, synchronized applause. Vesper pulled away, smiling triumphantly. She looked down at Renna. "Go on, Draken," Vesper urged, her voice amplified by the microphone. "Finish it. Put the trash back in the bin." Draken turned back to Renna. His face was hard, devoid of any wolf humanity. He was a machine, made of flesh. "Renna," he said, using her name for the first time, turning it into an insult. "You do not belong in my city. You do not belong in the light." He pointed to a drain grate near her feet. It was overflowing with black sludge, the mud of the foundation bubbling up through the iron bars. "You belong in the muck," Draken commanded. "So return to it." The courtyard went silent, save for the rain. "Kneel," Draken ordered. "Kneel in the mud and beg for the mercy of my steel. Admit that you are nothing but dirt beneath my boots." Renna looked up at him. Her green eyes were wide, reflecting the lightning. She didn't fight. She didn't try to run. Slowly, deliberately, she bent her knees. Silas the architect, watching from the shadows of a doorway, felt the hair on his arm stand up. "No," he whispered, clutching his blueprints. "Don't touch the ground. Don't touch it." Renna sank down. Her shins hit the wet, black stones. Her hands came down, palms flat, slapping into the overflowing mud of the drain. Skin touched earth. The circuit closed. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The rain continued to fall. Draken smirked, believing he had won. He believed he had broken the spirit of the wild. Then the sound stopped. The wind died. The thunder cut off mid-roll. The rain seemed to hang suspended in the air. A pulse, a visible ripple of green energy, shot out from Renna's kneeling form. It traveled through the cobblestones, moving faster than sight. Thum. It wasn't a sound from the sky. It was a sound from below. The dais where King Draken stood lurched violently to the left. Vesper screamed, grabbing the railing to keep from falling in her high heels. Draken stumbled, his eyes going wide. "What is this?" Draken shouted, looking at his guards. "Who is bombing us?" "It's not a bomb, sire!" Silas screamed from the doorway, his voice cracking with terror. "It's the foundation, the roots. They're waking up." Renna lifted her head. Her eyes were no longer just green. They were glowing with the intensity of a nuclear reactor. The veins in her neck pulsed with emerald light. She didn't speak with a human voice. She spoke with the grinding friction of tectonic plates. "You wanted the dirt, Draken?" The cobblestones around her exploded. Crack! Boom! Massive slabs of black stone, weighing tons, were flipped into the air like tiddlywinks. From the earth beneath, something ancient and furious erupted. They were roots, but they were not the roots of garden flowers. They were leviathans, thick as ancient redwoods, armored in bark that looked like iron scales. The roots burst from the concrete. They writhed like snakes, smashing through the immaculate pavement of the courtyard. The Iron-Spire screamed. The metal girders of the fortress twisted, screeching as the earth beneath them shifted. The glass canopies over the nobles shattered, raining shards down on the screaming crowd. "Guards!" Draken roared, drawing his sword. "Kill her! Kill the witch!" 3 guards charged Renna, their shock batons crackling. Renna didn't even look at them. She slapped her hand against the mud. A wall of jagged stone spears shot up from the ground, interposing themselves between her and the guards. The soldiers slammed into the rock, knocked unconscious by the earth itself. "I am not a witch," Renna's voice boomed, amplified not by speakers but by the air pressure itself. "I am the landlord, and your rent is overdue." She stood up. As she rose, a pillar of earth rose with her, lifting her high above the chaos, placing her eye level with the king on his dais. Draken stared at her. He couldn't process what he was seeing. The mute slave girl was riding a column of living bedrock. "The castle!" Vesper shrieked, pointing at the main tower. Draken looked back. The spire, the symbol of his dominance, the tallest structure in the world, was cracking. A massive fissure ran up the side of the black building. Green light poured from the crack. Giant vines were punching through the windows of the factories, wrapping around the smokestacks, crushing them like aluminum cans. The smog was clearing. The rain had stopped being acidic. It was now fueling the growth. Flowers were blooming instantly in the mud. Violent, thorny, carnivorous-looking flowers that snapped at the fleeing nobles. "You are destroying my city!" Draken yelled, pointing his sword at her. "Stop this! I command you!" Renna tilted her head. She looked at the king. She looked at the dais he stood on. "You commanded me to kneel," Renna said calmly. "I knelt. Now it is your turn." She clenched her fist. The earth beneath the marble dais vanished. It didn't just crumble. It opened. A sinkhole, perfectly round and impossibly deep, yawned open directly beneath the king's feet. The marble structure disintegrated. Vesper screamed as she slid toward the edge, her heels scrabbling on the wet stone. She managed to grab a piece of rebar jutting from the foundation, dangling precariously over the abyss. But Draken fell. He dropped straight down into the darkness. "No!" Draken shouted, flailing his arms. He fell 10 feet, 20 feet. He expected to hit the magma, to be incinerated, but he didn't hit the bottom. Snap! Something caught him. Vines, thick and hot to the touch, shot out from the walls of the sinkhole. They wrapped around his ankles, his waist, and his wrists. They jerked him to a halt with bone-jarring force. Draken swung there, suspended upside down over a glowing red pit of magma far below. His crown fell from his head, tumbling down, 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 until it hit the lava and melted into nothingness. He gasped, looking up. Above him, framed by the circle of the sinkhole and the stormy sky, Renna hovered on her pillar of earth. She looked down at him. She looked like a goddess of judgment. "Comfortable, king of concrete?" Renna asked, her voice echoing down the hole. Draken struggled against the vines. They were as hard as steel cables. He couldn't break them. He couldn't shift. The magic of the earth was suppressing his wolf. "Let me up!" Draken roared, though his voice was thin with terror. "I am the king. I own this land." "You own nothing," Renna corrected. "You are a tenant, and you have been a very bad tenant." Up on the surface, the chaos was absolute. The factories had stopped running. The steam engines were silent, choked by vines. The Iron-Spire was no longer a fortress. It was a ruin being reclaimed by the forest in real time. Lady Vesper, clinging to the rebar at the edge of the pit, looked up at Renna. Her synthetic fur coat was ruined, soaked in mud. Her perfect hair was a disaster. "Please!" Vesper sobbed, her cruelty washing away with her makeup. "I didn't mean it. I didn't mean what I said. Don't let me fall." Renna looked at Vesper. She didn't feel hate. She felt pity. A wolf who chose plastic over fur was already dead inside. "You won't fall," Renna said coldly. "Plastic takes 1,000 years to decompose. The earth has no use for you." She waved her hand. A massive Venus flytrap-like plant burst from the side of the pit. It opened its jaws and gently, almost delicately, plucked Vesper from the rebar. It didn't eat her. It wrapped around her, cocooning her in sticky, sap-covered leaves, trapping her against the wall of the pit, like a fly in amber. Vesper's screams were muffled into silence. Renna turned her attention back to the dangling king. She lowered her pillar of earth until she was hovering just above the opening of the sinkhole. "You wanted to sever the bond," Renna said. "You wanted to prove you were stronger than nature." She leaned over, staring down at him. "Look around you, Draken. Your steel is twisted. Your concrete is dust. Your crown is melted." Draken looked at the ruins of his life's work. He looked at the massive roots that had decimated his army. He looked at the sky, which was clearing, revealing a moon that shone brighter than he had ever seen it through the smog. He realized, with a sickening lurch of his stomach, that Silas was right. The world was alive, and he had tried to put it in a box. "What are you going to do?" Draken whispered, the fight draining out of him as the blood rushed to his head. "Are you going to drop me?" Renna considered it. The magma below was hot. It would be quick. But death was too easy. Death was an escape. "No," Renna said. "I'm going to plant you." She snapped her fingers. The vines holding Draken suddenly elongated. They lowered him, not into the fire, but onto a ledge of mud halfway down the pit. The vines released him, dropping him face first into the sludge. He sputtered, coughing up mud. He scrambled to his knees, wiping the filth from his eyes. He looked up. Renna was gone from the rim. The pillar of earth retracted, lowering her down to the courtyard level. She walked through the ruins of the Iron-Spire. The wolves, the nobles, the soldiers, the workers stopped running. They watched her. She was glowing. She was covered in flowers. She was the most terrifying thing they had ever seen. One by one, the wolves dropped to their knees, not because she commanded it, but because their instincts told them that the Alpha King was gone. There was a new apex in the territory. Silas the architect crawled out from under a collapsed archway. He looked at Renna. He bowed low, his forehead touching the dirt. "The Queen of the Green Ruin," Silas whispered. Renna stopped in the center of the devastation. She took a deep breath of the fresh, clean air. She could feel Draken climbing out of the pit, muddy and broken. She could feel Vesper trapped in her amber cage. She let out a long sigh. The rage of the earth began to settle, replaced by a deep, abiding calm. The industry was dead. The wild had returned, and Renna, the mute slave of the trench, finally had a home. Chapter 4. The silence that fell over the ruins of the Iron-Spire citadel was louder than the storm that had preceded it. The rain had stopped. The thunder had rolled away to the east, leaving behind a sky that was painfully clear. The moonlight, no longer filtered through a haze of coal smoke and chemical smog, shone down on the wreckage with a brilliance that felt almost judging. The fortress was unrecognizable. The great steel towers were twisted like pretzels, strangled by vines the size of subway trains. The concrete walls were shattered, burst in with moss and glowing fungi. The industrial heart of the Obsidian Pack, the engines, the pile drivers, the factories, was silent, choked by roots that had punched through the metal casings to crush the gears inside. It wasn't a wasteland. It was a garden, a violent, chaotic, overwhelming garden that had sprouted in seconds from the corpse of the city. In the center of the courtyard, where the marble dais used to be, there was now only a gaping hole leading down into the earth. And standing at the edge of that hole, perched on a throne formed from the twisted roots of an ancient oak tree that had erupted from the pavement, sat Renna. She was no longer the mud-stained slave. The rain had washed her clean. Her skin glowed with a faint bioluminescent shimmer like starlight trapped under quartz. Her hair, once matted and dull, floated around her face in soft waves, alive with static electricity. She wore no crown, but the air around her shimmered with a pressure that forced the surviving wolves to lower their heads. A scraping sound echoed from the lip of the sinkhole. A hand, gloved in white leather that was now black with filth, clawed at the edge of the broken pavement. Then another hand. Slowly, painfully, King Draken Obsidian hauled himself out of the pit. He was a ruin of a man. His expensive coat was shredded. His face was caked in the same sewage mud that he had forced Renna to kneel in only an hour ago. He coughed, spitting up black sludge, and collapsed onto his hands and knees on the wet stones. He looked up. He saw the legs of the throne. He looked higher. He met Renna's eyes. For a moment, Draken didn't recognize her. He looked for the cowering, mute girl he had dragged from the trench, but that girl was gone. In her place sat a titan. "You?" Draken rasped, his voice a broken wheeze. "You destroyed my home." Renna leaned forward. The wood of her throne creaked. A sound like a ship settling in the water. "I didn't destroy your home, Draken," Renna said. Her voice was calm, but it carried the deep, resonant timbre of the mountain itself. "I renovated it." She gestured to the ruins around them, to the wolves huddled under the wreckage, looking out at the new world with wide, terrified eyes. "Look," Renna commanded. "The air is breathable. The water in the aqueducts is running clear for the first time in a century. The silence. Can you hear it?" Draken staggered to his feet. He swayed, dizzy from the fall and the shock. He looked at his factories. They were gone. His legacy of steel and fire was nothing but scrap metal. "My kingdom," Draken whispered. "My power." "Your power was borrowed," Renna corrected. "You borrowed it from the earth, and you never paid it back. You thought you could pave over the wild, Draken. You thought that if you poured enough concrete, you could silence the heartbeat of the world. But you forgot that concrete cracks, and weeds always win." Draken's face twisted in a snarl. His wolf, the iron beast that had driven him to conquer, roared in defiance. He reached for his belt, for his sword. But the scabbard was empty. His sword had fallen into the magma. He was unarmed. He was covered in mud. He was stripped of his crown. "I am the Alpha!" Draken screamed, his voice cracking. "I am the king of the Iron-Spire. You are nothing but a slave, a mud-blood witch." He charged her. It was a pathetic, stumbling charge, fueled by nothing but ego and denial. Renna didn't move. She didn't raise a hand. She didn't conjure a wall of stone. She simply looked at the ground in front of him. The mud beneath Draken's feet suddenly liquefied. It turned into a deep, sucking quicksand. Draken slammed into the muck face first. He tried to push himself up, but the mud grabbed his wrists. It grabbed his ankles. It pulled him down, heavy and suffocating, until he was buried up to his chest. He thrashed, screaming, but the earth held him fast. He was trapped in the very element he had despised. "The mud suits you," Renna observed coolly. "It hides the ugliness of your ambition." Draken stopped struggling. He was panting, cold mud seeping into his clothes. He looked around for help. "Guards!" Draken shouted. "Silas, help me! Kill her!" Silas the architect stepped out from behind a curtain of vines. He was holding his blueprints, now soggy and useless. He looked at the king stuck in the mud. He looked at the queen, on the throne of roots. Silas dropped the blueprints. They landed in a puddle. "The foundation has spoken, sire," Silas said quietly. He turned toward Renna and dropped to one knee. He pressed his forehead to the mossy ground. "Long live the Queen of the Green Ruin." It started with Silas. Then a guard dropped his shock baton and knelt. Then a noble, her dress torn, sank to her knees. Then another and another. A wave of submission rippled through the courtyard. The Obsidian Pack, a society built on the worship of strength, recognized the ultimate power standing before them. Draken had steel, but steel rusted. Renna had the planet. And the planet always won. Draken watched his subjects bow. He watched his authority evaporate like steam. "Traitors!" Draken wept, tears cutting tracks through the mud on his face. "Cowards!" Renna stood up from her throne. She walked down the steps of twisted roots. She walked across the courtyard, her bare feet touching the grass that was already springing up between the broken stones. She stopped in front of Draken. She looked down at him. "I could kill you," Renna said. "The magma is hungry. The roots are thirsty. It would be easy." Draken looked up at her, fear finally piercing his arrogance. "Then do it. End it." "No," Renna said. She waved her hand. The mud around Draken loosened. It pushed him up, expelling him from the earth like a splinter being pushed from a wound. He scrambled backward, crawling away from her crab-like. "Death is a mercy," Renna said, "and you showed me no mercy." She pointed to the shattered gates of the citadel. Beyond them lay the vast, dark forest that Draken had tried to burn down. The forest that was now encroaching on the city, reclaiming its territory. "I exile you," Renna announced. Her voice boomed, startling a flock of birds from the new canopy. "Leave this place, Draken. Run. Run to the cities of glass and steel in the south. Run to the places where the earth is dead." She leaned in, her eyes glowing with a terrifying green fire. "But know this, wherever you go, the ground beneath your feet will remember, the trees will watch you, the wind will carry my scent. You will never be safe from the wild again. You will live the rest of your life knowing that you are only a guest, and I can revoke your lease at any moment." Draken scrambled to his feet. He looked at his ruined castle. He looked at the woman he had tried to bury. He realized he was small. He turned and ran. The former Alpha King, the breaker of wilds, sprinted toward the broken gates. He slipped on the wet grass. He scrambled up. He ran into the darkness of the forest, his silhouette disappearing into the shadows of the trees he had once marked for timber. Renna watched him go. She felt the vibration of his footsteps fading into the distance. She turned back to the courtyard, to the cocoon of amber where Lady Vesper was still trapped, preserved like a prehistoric insect, to the wolves kneeling in the ruins, to the architect waiting for orders. "Rise," Renna said softly. The pack stood up. They looked uncertain. They didn't know how to live without orders, without the grinding rhythm of the machines. "What do we do now, my queen?" Silas asked, looking around at the destruction. "We cannot rebuild the factories. The machinery is gone." Renna smiled. She walked over to the fissure in the ground where the magma glowed deep below, a source of geothermal heat, clean and endless. She touched a vine that was blooming with glowing blue fruit. "We don't rebuild," Renna said. "We grow." She looked up at the moon. For the first time in 10 years, she felt the bond settle. Not a bond to a man, but a bond to the pack, a bond to the land. The Iron-Spire was dead. The green ruin had begun. Renna sat back on her throne of roots. She closed her eyes and listened. She heard the wind in the leaves. She heard the water in the aqueducts. She heard the heartbeat of the mountain, steady and strong. And for the first time in her life, the earth was silent. It wasn't screaming anymore. It was purring.